Hello and welcome to this Wednesday's morning market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, Apple unveils outrageously powerful chip for AI in latest iPads, as well as that the US revokes licenses for supply of chips to China's Huawei. And lastly, Israel threatens to expand Rafah operation as the US struggles to revive peace talks. We've got lots to talk about on the charts also, with lots happening on the economic calendar, but we'll come to that near the end, so make sure you stay around so you can see that. Before we get straight into it though, make sure you subscribe. The first article to talk about is to do with Apple. Now, Apple has now unveiled a new iPad series with what is being called the most powerful chip for AI. This comes in a new effort by Apple to grow on its artificial intelligence services. Now, this is of course not only a very significant article for the tech industry as a whole, but also is very interesting with regards to AI. Now, only a few weeks ago, maybe even last week, or a few days back, I can't remember the exact date, but essentially we were talking about Apple and their kind of commitment to AI and how they were starting to work on their kind of AI services a lot more. As we've spoken about many times, the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and even Google, who have built their own kind of AI services and AI industry within their own products and their firm basically, and they've had great success. Think of Microsoft's Open AI. We've of course got Meta's latest model coming out very soon, latest AI model coming out within weeks, and we've also got Google, which has access to basically the largest database to generate and produce a new AI model. And so as a result of that, Apple's really been left behind within this industry. And we know as well that Apple has been struggling greatly recently with their own sales, their own product sales, with iPhones and other iMac products really struggling to be sold at the usual levels. This is obvious to if we factor in the macroeconomic situation, the other issues at hand to do with demand for these consumer facing firms and companies, but ultimately this is worrying investors who feel like Apple is therefore being left behind. And I think Apple ultimately has a great deal to offer with regards to AI, because it does have that kind of aspect to it which can bring these services to customers with greater ease than maybe other companies such as Microsoft, which don't have their own well-known phone or well-known device which they can then present their new AI tools with. So if that kind of makes sense, whereas Apple does have that. Apple does have the likes of Siri integrated into Apple devices, and lots of different Apple apps and products which are already integrated into the iOS ecosystem, which could basically then use AI and use these new AI models which are being produced. So that's why Apple kind of does have some opportunity to grow into this industry, whilst at the moment they are kind of being left behind somewhat, and that, as I said, is worrying investors greatly. And we were talking the other day about Apple, working on those AI services by investing in new kind of AI laboratories, new AI research facilities within Europe, in Zurich especially, buying out 2 AI startups. I believe one was within the virtual reality space and another within something to do with AI. I can't remember the exact industry, but ultimately Apple was integrating them into Apple to ultimately learn more about AI and develop their AI industry. And we already know as well that Apple has been stealing, or at least recruiting a great deal of employees from the likes of Google and others, which have hoarded a great deal of the kind of AI industry workforce, and the greatest minds within the AI industry. And so Apple is trying to make a stab at that by then recruiting those employees to them. So ultimately Apple is in a very interesting spot, being quite undervalued right now stock wise, or at least in comparison to its previous self, and ultimately that is because it's being left behind within the AI industry. And so what will be interesting to see is whether this announcement to do with a new AI chip like we saw with Nvidia, will push Apple's prices higher, with only last year the M3 chip being released for new Macs, and now the M4 chip has been released for Apple's latest iPad Pro devices. The rapid growth of the AI industry has led developers demand to push companies like Apple and Nvidia to new levels in an effort to develop new and more powerful processors which are capable of handling a greater deal of data. Microsoft, Amazon, and even Google have taken a stab at the industry, and all of such have released new AI-focused processors within the last few months. The vice president of Apple's platform architecture has hailed the new M4 chip as its graphics processor as a big step forward over its previous chips. This has ultimately come as investors have piled the pressure onto Apple to release new AI features which would be able to compete with the AI technologies presented by Microsoft with OpenAI as well as Google, especially since Apple's phone sales have been falling. So a very interesting article there, and one which we'll see impacting the markets today and for the rest of the week. Next article to talk about though is to do with the US revoking licenses for China's Huawei. Now, Biden and his administration have now revoked export licenses which allow Intel and Qualcomm to supply Huawei with semiconductors. This comes as the US government piles the pressure on Huawei, who represents the most powerful Chinese telecommunications equipment company. Now, obviously, this is a very interesting article and kind of comes back to a very a topic which we frequently cover on this channel, which is US and Chinese trade relations, Chinese geopolitics, as well as just the US and Chinese economy in general. And of course, we do know that over the past few years, especially since 2022, or at least very much since also the Trump presidency, we've definitely seen this kind of trade deterioration, or deterioration in trade relations between the US and China, with China's growth economically and militarily ultimately coming at risk to the US's global dominance and presence, and therefore the US has kind of been combating this by introducing their own trade restrictions and military restrictions on China. And we do know geopolitics wise, there's a great deal of tensions within the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, so that's always at risk of boiling into a conflict, and so that's why we kind of frequently cover that as a topic. And ultimately, tensions, geopolitical tensions, have definitely been growing between the US and China, with Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan a few years back ultimately beginning this chain of events where we've seen now the Chinese spy balloon being shot down over the US. We've heard reports of China supplying weapons or equipment or information to Russia as Russia's invasion into Ukraine does continue. We've also seen Chinese vessels Chinese military vessels try and assert their dominance within the South China Sea and stopping Filipino vessels, for example, and that sort of thing, which has all kind of created this very tense situation between the US and China. Despite that, however, of course, we do know that the US and China have kind of been working on their relations and trying to build back at that by having a few conferences recently and a few talks, but ultimately, as this kind of article does note, the US and China are still at a trade war with one another, and as we can see here, the US has now revoked licenses for the supply of chips to China's Huawei, which is another kind of effort against the free trade between two nations, and ultimately is another representation of those heightened tensions and weakened relations. So this is definitely a very interesting article to note, and I think something that is always important to keep in mind when we're also thinking about Taiwan, because of course Taiwan is that kind of semiconductor chip manufacturer of the world, and so seeing these kind of licenses and trade deals fall out with regards to chips between the US and China always puts at risk a nation like that. Now, the US has already got severe restrictions on the sales of American technology to Huawei, with Republican congressmen and women both pressuring Joe Biden to take even tougher action against the Chinese company, which they warn of committing cyber espionage across the world. The US has become increasingly worried over Huawei's ability to produce their own chips, especially since the company has done such despite extreme export control. So a very interesting article there, and something that's important to keep on your mind. A quick article to cover at the end, though, with regards to geopolitics, is of course to do with Israel and its threats towards expanding Rafah operations. Now, Israel has now made threats to expand its military presence in Rafah following the IDF's tanks and troops seizing the main border crossing between Gaza and Egypt. This has also made peace talks in Cairo and a hostage deal ever more important to discuss. The operation in Rafah came just hours after Hamas agreed to a draft proposal of a hostage ceasefire. However, Netanyahu said it was far from Israeli requirements. Now, of course, yesterday we spoke about that draft proposal with last week as covering, that proposal being made by Israel to Hamas, which spoke about, there being a 6-week temporary ceasefire where 33 hostages are exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, and in that time, humanitarian aid would be supplied to Gaza. And we also know that certain displaced refugees within the Gaza Strip would then be able to return back to the north. That said, whilst we did hear that Hamas had agreed to that draft proposal, we also did comment on the fact that seemingly Hamas had accepted something that was slightly different to the actual proposal submitted by Israel, and therefore it does seem like Israel has now embarked on this operation as a result of not seeing that proper communication, or not proper or not seeing Hamas agree to the deal which they wanted. So as a result of that, we're now seeing this is military operation into Rafah, which was of course warned, which many military leaders around the world, or at least political leaders around the world, warned Israel against, and that was even coming from Israel's strongest allies within the West, including Britain and the US. So most certainly this is a dire situation and a very interesting topic to keep your eyes on, and this is certainly now going to affect markets greatly, as kind of geopolitical ramifications do kind of come out of this, as we have always been worried or warned of that kind of regional war breaking out within the Middle East as a result of this conflict itself. So lots to think about and lots to look out for with regards to this topic. We've got lots in the articles though. Next to talk about, of course, is the charts, where we do have quite a bit happening. And to begin with, we are talking about the US 30. More importantly, we're talking about US indices as a whole, with price now interestingly making its way up into this higher level of liquidity and higher level of resistance, with price also pushing above that kind of overbought RSI level above 70 points, which of course would be a traditionally bearish signal. That said, we're not seeing any bearish divergence, which would be something that would definitely influence our perspective on the matter, but ultimately, price has moved into this level. Interestingly, this level also included that kind of minus 27.2% Fibonacci extension level, and so we were expecting a great deal of bearish liquidity and momentum to be bearish liquidity and orders to be within that area, and we're kind of now expecting that sell-off. So it will be interesting to see whether price does sell off from that area as a result of that being an area which we would expect a great deal of bearish orders to be placed in. Should price retrace away from that, we could definitely be expecting price to make its way back down to this key old area of resistance but new area of support around this level. If we draw out a fib, we could see whether this would actually be a key area. We've got the 38.20 lining up in that zone, so definitely if price makes its way back down into that level, we could definitely see price react to that zone. So that's definitely something you should keep your eyes on. That's all to talk about on the US 30 though. We're not receiving much important US economic data today, which I don't, so therefore I can't say whether the markets will be affected greatly by news, but ultimately we'll have to wait and see. But nothing clear is on the calendar just yet. Next to talk about though is the dollar. So still talking about the US, and interestingly on the dollar, price is now pushing somewhat to the upside and is reacting to this key liquidity level, which has previously acted as an area of resistance and support. So this is definitely a key area which prices interacted with before. The question will be, of course, whether price now does sell off from this level and does then continue to range and consolidate within this kind of period, this range, as should price now break above this level, really we shouldn't see much resistance up until price making its way all the way back up to these old highs, these old monthly highs. So definitely look out for that on the dollar. Not much to say once again though for the dollar, as price is moving in a slow manner. It's kind of within these boxy ranges, and we're not receiving much economic data with regards to the dollar or the US economy, so we can't say much on the kind of currency. Next to talk about though is Euro USD, which of course is mirroring the inverse of the dollar, so we're not likely to see much happening either. And here we can once again see that price is just consolidating. It's stagnated at these higher levels after retracing, and price is really kind of just staying within this range now between these two key liquidity zones. So definitely keep your eyes on Euro USD, as whilst price is within this range, ultimately opportunities can still arise within those intraday levels and kind of shorter time frames. Next, talk about those pound yen. Not much to say on pound yen, just like on other assets today, with price just sitting above this key liquidity zone for the moment. So not much is happening once again for pound yen. Interestingly though, price has pushed above this area of liquidity. We might usually expect price to stay below such an area, but definitely price has pushed above it. So it'll be interesting to see now whether, because price is above that level, price will now be ready to swing to the upside and stay above that zone. So keep your eyes on pound yen. Next, talk about though is Bitcoin, which is currently consolidating and stagnating. So little to say on it really. But ultimately, this $63,000 a Bitcoin level is definitely proving to be one of great support. So it will be interesting to see whether price even peaks below that, blips below that today, or whether price can just stay above that level and possibly even continue a move to the upside, as for quite some time now, really since March, price has just been ranging and staying around this range just above $60,000 a Bitcoin, apart from this of course fake out not too long ago at the start of May. So definitely keep your eyes on Bitcoin. Obviously the Fed's rhetoric has greatly affected Bitcoin's recent rally, and so we should be waiting on any news from the Fed, so then really start to expect Bitcoin's cycle to continue to the upside. Next talk about though is gold, where price has now reacted to this area of liquidity, despite price more importantly reacting to this 50% Fibonacci retracement level at the end of April, start of May. So price has interacted with that 50%, but really has not made a significant move, significant move away from that level, and is really now failing to break above this key liquidity zone. Should price break above this liquidity zone though, we've definitely got a great deal of upside potential, with this area kind of marking that last area of resistance for price. Lastly to talk about though is oil, which of course is important to note with regards to the heightened geopolitical tensions. Despite that though, we really aren't seeing much happen on oil, with price actually kind of somewhat consolidating to the downside, slowly moving to the downside, but really not much to say for oil, apart from the fact that price is sitting on this key liquidity zone. So keep your eyes on oil nonetheless. Lastly to talk about though is the economic calendar, where we're really getting no economic data, or at least not very important economic data, apart from some important things to maybe listen out for. Firstly, we are getting though the Italian retail sales figure, followed by the US mortgage applications figure, followed by that we're receiving the US wholesale inventories figure, as well as we're having numerous Fed official speeches. And I think that's the really key thing to listen out for today, is we are hearing from some very interesting Fed officials. So listening to their rhetoric and understanding what the Fed is saying and thinking is always important to formulating your own monetary policy outlook and understanding of the way the Fed is thinking. We've got lots in the articles though, lots on the charts and lots on the economic calendar. That's all from us at Wildwood Capital. Have a great trading day. See you later. Bye.